I'm Philip Samartzis. I'm the lead curator of Creative Antarctica, Australian artists and writers in the far south. I'm a sound artist who has travelled to Antarctica twice, in 2010 and 2016, through the Australian Antarctic Division Arts Fellowship Program. The curatorial rationale was really based around creating a counter-narrative to the way Antarctica has been expressed through science, mythology, and also the media. In order to produce an exhibition of this scale, we formed a curatorium based around the researchers involved in the ARC Discovery project, and we basically went through a process of a must-have list, which we then synthesised around different thematics and I guess around different material and technological expression as well, trying to include some significant historic works and figures such as Nell Law, the first Australian woman to travel to Antarctica, Sydney Nolan, Lynn Onus, one of the few Indigenous Aboriginal artists to ever travel to Antarctica. The exhibition design was developed in collaboration with Catherine Horseman from HOHAB, and Catherine's been amazing to work with. She's listened and has built a beautiful exhibition that highlights the architecture and the colour schemes of Antarctica. Very much an emphasis on contemporary modes of articulation as well through screen and sound. Particularly my background in sound, I'm very much interested in the Antarctic soundscape, so it is very present within this exhibition in ways that it's often ignored in most other presentations of Arctic and Antarctic works. The exhibition, in fact, tries to create an embodied and immersive experience through architecture, through technology, through the visual artworks, and through the spatial choreography of the exhibition being spread across 2 galleries. And so the walk between one gallery to another gallery offers the audience opportunity to imagine what it would be like to be in a blizzard with no visibility and try and get from one place to another that on surface is maybe 100 to 200 metres, but in reality in Antarctica is a life and death situation sometimes. So that distributed model of exhibition, I think, ties nicely to some of my experiences in Antarctica.
Hi, my name's Polly Stanton and I'm a senior lecturer at RMIT in media, and I'm also an artist and a filmmaker, and I work a lot with landscapes and contested places. So I travelled to Antarctica at the end of 2025 in November, and I was back here just before Christmas, so I was there for about 3.5 weeks. And I went down as the 2025 Arts Fellow. So I think one of the reasons I've been really interested in Antarctica for many years is that it is a polar region that is very close to Australia. There's this sort of unknown aspect to Antarctica that I was incredibly interested in visiting and really experiencing in an embodied way what that place is. I think the fellowship and travelling to Antarctica is a really difficult thing to do, and it's not like a normal residency or fellowship in my experience. It sits really outside of what most artists will get a chance to do. So I went down there to specifically focus on some of the human-made environments, specifically Casey Station. I'm making a larger work at the moment, which is still in development, but for the exhibition I've pulled together a number of scenes that will be part of this larger moving image work. But at the moment, scenes that are really sort of moving towards the station, around the station, then back out into the landscape as I happen. And I've called it Edgelands because really when you're in Antarctica, for a lot of us that's what we're experiencing. We're experiencing these edgelands of that continent. I think I'm still working through how it's transformed my practice because I've only been back for a couple of months, but already I think travelling to a place as remote as Antarctica and as little visited and equally as difficult to get to and experience, and the harshness of what that place is in many ways, and the incredible beauty of that environment, which is actually so hard to take in some ways. think I can just feel that whole experience sort of chipping away at me slowly.
My name's Martin Walsh and I'm a photographer and artist based in Lead Curator, Hobart. I grew up in Hobart on the edge of the Southern Ocean and looking out over the Derwent, watching the Aurora Australis come and go from the Antarctic bases. There's always this fascination with what was over the horizon. The project was to go down and make a document of the Antarctic summer, that period with no night. And so I set up two semi-permanent camera installations on the base and shot photographs every 2.5 minutes for the duration that I was there. And then when I brought that material back to Hobart, computationally sliced all those thousands, tens of thousands of images up into an animation that allows you to see time moving as like a river across the frame. But the process was to really try and give a feeling of what it was like to be in that endless, timeless, strange space of the Antarctic summer. Because the work takes time to engage with, people will often see it, glance at it. They might not spend time with it initially, but once they sit down with it and they slow down, watching the video becomes really hypnotic. And I've been surprised by the number of people who, once they've engaged with the work, sit through the whole work, 35 minutes. And they get up really thinking, gosh, how long was that? 5 minutes? Effectively, they've experienced this time dilation distortion that Antarctic expeditioners experience in the Antarctic summer, and I'm sure they do it in the winter as well when there's no days. Our personal impact's really quite profound. I was there long enough to fall in love with the place and not want to leave. And it really wasn't until I went to Antarctica and walked out onto the ice on the plateau, 50 kilometres away from the base and stood there. That's when you understand what wilderness really is. And it's like being on another planet. And also the encounters with animals, birds in particular, penguins, but they were interested in us. And that's just an amazing experience to have the environment not threatened, not used to being challenged by the human presence is pretty profound. So having left that behind, I often feel that as a kind of a loss. I walk around Tasmania and I think, what was this place like when Indigenous people had similar kind of relationships with animals? I mean, they're obviously hunting as well, but there's a sharing of the land, a sharing of the environment. I think it really changed how I felt about my place in the world.
I'm Elizabeth Leane. I'm Professor of Antarctic Studies in the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of Tasmania, and I'm the lead of the Creative Antarctica research project. Australia's been involved in Antarctica quite intensely for a long time. We were involved in early exploration in the early 20th century with Douglas Mawson, and Australia has been really very involved in Antarctic governance, quite a big player for a middle power in that international governance system. Plus we do a lot of science in Antarctica for the size of our country, so we are really very involved. The Creative Antarctica project is funded by the Australian Research Council. It's given us a chance to do a lot of work finding out who the artists and writers are in Australia who've travelled to Antarctica and come back and produced works. It's allowed us to interview over 50 of them, and that's really fed into the Creative Antarctica exhibition, which is one output of our project. Antarctica has quite a long history of literature, and we really wanted to include Australians' contribution to that literature in the exhibition. And again, big names, people like Thomas Keneally or Helen Garner have written about Antarctica, as well as a host of other excellent writers. It's much harder, I think, to represent literature in an exhibition. So we've tried to include it in a number of different ways by having little excerpts from from books as quotations on the wall, having a kind of bookshelf of Antarctic books to show the richness of that writing. We've even got some interactive activities, so we've got a table where you can compose your own Antarctic poem using bits of ice floes. So I was very keen that we don't just think about visual art when it comes to Antarctica, that we incorporate all the different art forms, whether that's performance, music and composition, and poetry, fiction and plays in terms of literature, and I think we've done that really well. Climate change is really beginning to impact the Antarctic in a big way. In the last 10 years, we've seen the sea ice around Antarctica really diminish, and that's going to impact the continental ice as well. We're having the glaciers that terminate in the sea. The warm ocean is undermining them from the bottom. If those glaciers retreat or disintegrate, that means that the flow speeds up, and essentially we get the ice mass decreasing, and that is going to increase sea level rise. And then that impacts wildlife who forage from the ice, and krill and algae that live under the ice. It impacts currents, and that has a knock-on effect up to the northern hemisphere, and food webs and all those sorts of things. So people think of Antarctica as being remote, but it really is an engine room of the world, and it's an engine room which is, undergoing some big changes and breaking down. It's really quite urgent. So the big message has to be to protect Antarctica by decreasing emissions, essentially.
Everyone who's there has a role, and they have a community. They have a small coterie of people that they work with closely. But the artist is alone, and the artist is the outsider in a place so alien and strange that it's like travelling to, for me, it was like travelling to Mars or the moon, that everything I understood about my life on this planet didn't hold water, and then trying to elicit something from that experience that's unique to all of us. And that's how I've been transformed by visiting the far south.